Hello and welcome. My name is Pat Dunn, and I'm the Director of Digital Solutions for the American Heart Association Center for Health Technology and Innovation. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. As we kick off Heart Month, I'd like to take a moment to remind everyone that this Friday, February 7th, is National Wear Red Day in honor of Go Red for Women. This initiative is dedicated to raising awareness about heart disease, the leading cause of death in women, and steps we can take to prevent it. So I encourage all of you to wear red this Friday and help spread the word. The healthcare landscape is evolving rapidly, and technology is playing an increasingly vital role in improving patient care and health outcomes. Many healthcare professionals are now exploring alternative career pathways in health technology, leveraging their clinical expertise in innovative new ways. Today's webinar, From Clinical to Tech, Alternative Career Pathways for Healthcare Professionals, will provide valuable insights for professionals who have successfully transitioned into the healthcare space. Whether you're actively considering a career shift or just curious about what's possible, this conversation will offer inspiration, guidance, and actionable advice. We are honored to be joined by an exceptional panel of experts, a cardiologist, a physical therapist, and a nurse who have made the transition themselves. Dr. Jayne Morgan is Vice President of Medical Affairs at Hello Heart. Jeffrey Abraham is a physical therapist and partner at Health Advances. And Brooke Skovira is an MBA and a nurse and partner success manager at Brook Health. And there's no relationship between the Brookes. Each of our panelists brings unique experiences and perspectives on how clinical skills can be applied in health technology, and we look forward to hearing their insights. Thank you all for being here today. We encourage you to engage, to ask questions, take advantage of this opportunity to learn from those who have navigated this journey successfully. And with that, let's dive into the discussion. So let's begin with some introductions, and we'll just start with some brief introductions, and then we'll go back around for a little bit more detail. But Dr. Morgan, would you like to begin?
Absolutely. And hello to everyone. My name is Dr. Jayne Morgan. I'm a cardiologist. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I've spent a good part of my career really in research and clinical trials and have a big focus on women's health as well as the health of all populations. Currently, I'm serving as the Vice President of Medical Affairs for Hello Heart, which is a digital mobile health device that moves you towards a better and healthier heart life.
Great. And Jeff?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Abraham. As Pat said, I started my career as a practicing physical therapist and then transitioned over into the biotech industry, working in practicing commercialization to where I came today to be a partner at Health Advances, which is a global healthcare strategy consulting firm where I help run the digital health and health IT practice, focusing on go-to-market strategy and commercialization for digital health technologies, everything from RPM to digital measures to virtual care.
Great. And Brooke?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Brooke Skovira. I'm a registered nurse in upstate New York, and I currently work as a partner success manager for a digital health company called Brook Health. And we provide remote patient monitoring to primary care offices and specialty offices in New York and in Massachusetts.
Great. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, a little bit deeper dive on how and why you made this move. And again, let's start with Jayne.
So it's really an interesting question. And I think, my career is a testament to not being afraid to step forward into things. I did not necessarily have a proscribed path. There was no one going before me or blazing the trail. And yet I began to increasingly be sort of drawn into the world of biotechnology. So I was leading cardiovascular research, the cardiovascular research program at Piedmont Healthcare, which is the largest healthcare system in the state of Georgia. And I was working on that, but outside of that, I was doing a lot of work with venture capitalists and biotech companies and startups and working with the Georgia Research Alliance. And I became the first president of the Georgia Southeast Life Sciences Organization. And so I started then to develop a think tank at Piedmont in the innovation space. And that's really how my foray began. Prior to that, I had a really big background at Solvay and AbbVie, working really in R&D and also medical affairs.
Great. We'll change the order around here periodically. So we'll go to Brooke next. Let's hear a little about your story about how you made that transition.
Sure. So I had some early career exposure to health technology. One of my first jobs was working as a medical scribe. So before I was even a nurse, I just saw how interesting it was and the impact that it had when there were advances in healthcare technology, and how that really streamlined care for doctors and nurses. So I definitely believe in the value of clinicians, being in technology roles because we understand the workflow, we understand the evidence-based recommendations behind why we, provide intervention. So I really saw that opportunity to use my nursing background in cardiology and also in women's health and transfer that into the digital health world.
Great. And Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. I would say there were probably two transition points for me. One was going from being a physical therapist into the biotech space, which is, I wouldn't say necessarily what people would say is the most logical transition. I think, though, what you underestimate, kind of picking up off of Brooke, is that, or what I underestimated, was that our knowledge of the healthcare system as practitioners, understanding how billing, coding, reimbursement, how that whole space works, really actually made a relatively easy transition into the biotech world, working in market access and reimbursement consulting. And when I got there, I just got really lucky to focus on med tech and diagnostics. So I was working on the cutting edge of precision medicine, new devices, things like that, and I really enjoyed it. And as I was looking for the next steps in my career after a stint in biopharma, digital therapeutics and digital health came up, and I realized that I've always liked working on the cutting edge. I've always liked working on new innovative technologies, and I was lucky enough to be able to make the transition into the digital therapeutics world at the time.
Great. So Brooke, what surprised you it sounds like you kind of already were a little bit familiar with the space, but especially then with your healthcare knowledge and training, any surprises when you moved into the tech world?
Yeah, I think there's a very big there's a difference between medical terminology and then product management terminology. So I would really advise anybody looking to go into the tech world, learn product management terms and learn about different stages of startups. Each series, like a Series A company, might have a different set of issues that they're facing compared to a more mature company. So I would really encourage anybody interested in transitioning into tech to really study those product management terms and learn more about startups in general. And that'll help you learn a lot of those like business terms, and then you'll appear very confident and competent when interviewing for any role you might be interested in. So
Brooke, I think that's great advice. I found that to be true myself, both from understanding the business, so even business terminology, even, when you throw around words like Series A and Series B, you don't learn those things in medical school or nursing school or PT school. But then even on the tech side, what is an API or what is a cloud? I mean, those things, it's just new terminology. So learning the terminology, I think is super important. Jeff,
yeah,
how about you? Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
there's definitely a big gap there because we don't get exposed to those terms in school, like you said. So that's a great point.
Yep. How about you, Jeff? What surprised you?
Yeah, following off of Brooke, I think, the fact that API didn't mean active pharmaceutical ingredient is like a running joke and test that we use at our company, and my previous company as well. But I think it was the way that people that come, because when you have health tech, you usually have a good chunk of people, to Brooke's point, that come from a tech background and people that come from a healthcare background. And over time, there will be people that come from a blended background as we build more expertise and experience and more healthcare professionals get into that space. But it wasn't just, to Brooke's point, which I think is great about the terminology and the lingo, it's also the way that they think and the way that they operate. Innovation in healthcare, even in the best of circumstances, can be slow compared to technology. In technology, the concept is fail fast, agile, sprint, concepts that we're not necessarily used to on the healthcare side, or they mean a different thing. And so I think understanding your counterparts in the tech space, understanding how they think, and not saying no and wholeheartedly rejecting that concept of moving a little quicker, but understanding how you can do it safely for patients and providers in an effective manner was a really big learning for me. It took me a couple of years.
Excellent. And Jayne, what surprised you?
You know, as a physician, we sit at an interesting intersection as being oftentimes the end user, but also the one who may be implementing it. And, you know, I find even though physicians use a lot of technology within our practice and within our patient management and within hospitals, we're not necessarily involved in the development. It sort of appears after a committee at the hospital has made a decision that we'll be utilizing this technology, and then everyone's scrambling to learn it. And I think one of the things that we have begun to educate physicians on is how do we get this technology before it's sort of thrust upon us? And we've seen, you know, a lot of disasters actually with technology coming into systems and actually interfacing and interfering with that relationship between the patient and the doctor in the advent of sort of the good of everyone. And I think it's a great example of not getting enough physician buy-in. And when I say physicians, I'm talking specifically about physicians as a physician, because oftentimes we've been the end user. We're the first ones that are actually utilizing it, but we actually haven't been involved in a lot of that product development. So when you're in, you know, the biotech space, doctors and other people within the whole healthcare arena really need to be involved in how is that product going to be developed? Who is it going to be used on? What is going to be the indication? Is that the right indication? Have we tested it on the right population? You know, is this the population that we've tested on? Is this actually how it's going to be used in real practice? And I've seen those conversations start to develop a little bit more now. But you know, there's still really a long way to go, and doctors particularly don't have a great understanding of the biotech, the venture capital space, or even the clinical trial space. What are we trained to do? We're trained to know about the drugs after they're FDA approved. We're trained to know about the devices after they become available. We're supposed to know how to use them and what the indications are and how to have these conversations with patients, not really how they got here in the first place, which also means that we're managing all of the frailties of the devices, all of the unknowns of the medications. We are now reporting these adverse events and reporting side effects to different agencies. And I think part of what I've tried to do is make sure doctors, physicians really understand you've got to get on the other side of it, because oftentimes we're using it, but they've gotten no input from us. And we are sort of putting Band-Aids and managing and kind of juggling it and waiting for the next iteration.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Jayne, you know, you're a practicing, experienced cardiologist. You know, do you see a trend even within some of your peers where maybe in the past a career pathway might have been to be a chief of staff or a head of a department, to really move in either into industry or even moving into more of an entrepreneurial role, either as a chief medical officer or actually even maybe even starting their own company?
You know, Pat, if I had $1,000 for every single time someone came up to me or DM'd me or reached out to me to say, how do I get to be like you? How do I get to be where you are? I would like to transition out of medicine as well. Then, you know, I would like to say perhaps I still would do this webinar for you, but I certainly would be independently wealthy. Um, I get asked that question all the time. And here's what, you know, I often say is that in my career, I have not been afraid to step into the gray areas. And people often like to feel comfortable in areas that are black and white, that are clearly defined. You know the goals, you understand the rules. And biotechnology is often very, very, very gray. And so my career is a career of living in the gray zone, being in the fog, oftentimes being the first one, not really actually knowing what the end of this road is going to be, but being on the road anyway, making decisions in real time. You've got to be able to feel comfortable in this area of unpredictability and unknown. In order to be successful currently in this environment. Now, generations coming behind us, maybe we will have made it very clear for people and they will be able to live in the black and white. But right now, you certainly are in a gray area. There is risk. Most people are risk averse. Certainly, hospital systems are risk averse. And so you can understand how it becomes very, very difficult to kind of retrain your brain. And I would say for me, I've always taken a deep breath and stepped into the fog. When something came up, I stepped towards it instead of pulling back. And that's really been the difference in the trajectory of my career and in others.
That's great. And Jeff, is there any similarities in the physical therapy world? Are people in physical therapy also moving more into industry or even more into their own business pathways?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. I said I'm judging a case competition this Friday that actually is MDs. There won't be any PTs at this one. So to support Jayne's point, I get that question a lot. And then I go back and speak at my school. I went to BU, and I go back to Sargent and I talk to the PTs and the OTs and the speech pathologists, and the interest in technology and the interest in exploring careers. And for lack of a better word, they kind of just looking at business, but they're really interested in health tech when you talk to them. It's really exploded. And I think they're looking for pathways and ways not to leave immediately and not to leave patient care 100%, but they are looking for ways to make their mark on the biotech space. And they see the capability that they have to improve patient care, not just by seeing 20 patients a day times X number of days a year and X number of years in their lives, but by implementing technology that can make that more efficient, better, cheaper, faster.
And Jeff makes a good point. In medical school, we're not taught any of this, right? We're taught to take care of the patients, understand your medications, know the side effects, be available, be altruistic, have compassion, all of that type of thing. But I think we certainly can bring all of those skills to technology, but what we don't hear about are alternative career paths. You're in medical school to learn to practice. And then I think when you get out of medical school, you start to have a bigger world and you say, how do I step into this world? And I think to Jeff's point, many physicians and others in the whole healthcare arena are not necessarily looking to leave their profession. They're looking to leverage the skills that they have in another area. No one's looking to leave. We love what we do. We now want to leverage it in a different direction.
Excellent. And Brooke, you're obviously earlier in your career, but I'd love to get your, nursing perspective. Historically, nurses, many times are in more of a caregiving role, and may feel like this is, it's not less caregiving, it's just a different environment. But what are your perspectives on nurses who want to make this transition?
Yeah, and Jayne made a lot of great points. I definitely echo that sentiment. There's more than one way to help people. And I think nurses and other clinicians, they all go into healthcare because we want to help people. And working in tech, you can really influence system changes. And I think a lot of nurses, get frustrated. I've heard the term moral injury get thrown around just because we realize, the reality is that we don't unfortunately get the opportunity to provide the best care all the time just because we don't have the resources. And a lot of times we just don't have the time to sit there at the bedside and educate a patient for, 20 minutes. It's just not reality. So I think the thing about transferring from, acute care over to tech is that there is still the opportunity to interact with patients and help people and make a difference in their lives. It just might be a little non-traditional. So, as both Jayne and Jeff mentioned, it is a little intimidating to step into that space because it's not mapped out and you might not know exactly what it looks like. But there's definitely that opportunity to make an impact at a system level and really help patients still.
Yeah, you've all made the point that, there's different ways to provide care. There's different ways to add value, and I think what we all know is that, a 23-year-old software developer, writing a super cool program doesn't necessarily know anything about healthcare and workflow and even data elements. So it seems, and this is just really open to any of you, but just thoughts on the value that what you're bringing is really, understanding how these technologies work. It's one thing to have cool technology, but the technology isn't valuable unless people actually use it and it's actually bringing value to the patients and ultimately to the system. Any thoughts on
Pat,
that
you
as
make
far as
a really
value
great point.
prop?
I mean, in hospitals, there are so many processes in place, so many protocols. It is a labyrinth that's even difficult to navigate for those of us who are in it every single day. And you're right, software developers oftentimes, develop something brilliant, but it's not going to have practical application when you put it into this labyrinth system. And I'll be the first to admit the system doesn't always work that well. And yet this is the system as we have it now. And then you find all of your intelligence and your brilliance going for naught because it's not able to be utilized, or it turns out to be more cumbersome or more onerous or add more steps or another layer of the process. It has to go through levels of approval. So you really need to understand who your end users are going to be and bring them in. You make a good point, not necessarily also for their medical expertise, but to tell you what the rules are and then to tell you how it really works, such that you can develop it, not for the rules, but how it really works. And those are the nuances that we see time and again are stumbling blocks for the developments of new technology.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up on Jane, and her point is so critical, and Brooke alluded to this earlier as well with kind of the terminology, but user-centered design. When you're developing a product that's direct to consumer, right? You're concerned about the person buying it, and that's kind of it, right? But in the business that we all work in, you have to be concerned about the patient, the provider, the health system, the payer sometimes. So like, it's not just a user-centered design, it's almost like a stakeholder-centered design, and understand that your stakeholders play different roles. To Jane's point, there's the end user, but there's also the decision maker, the influencer. That may be somebody else at the health system, to her point. It may be a health insurer in some situations. It may be a patient or a caregiver. You really have to do a good job of mapping out the stakeholders that your product is going to touch and understand what they need in order to make that product successful. So it's a really broad, multifaceted approach that otherwise in biotech, half the time you're like, well, here's a pill, take it. That's not how this works. And so we have to be a little bit more inclusive in our design and in our intentions of how we're developing products.
Right. Be a little more thoughtful as to how is this actually going to be implemented and where are the stages? This is A, and I'm talking about Z. What's happening with all those letters in the middle? Because that's where you'll get held up. And when we talk about growth and growth strategy, that's going to stymie the growth of your company, is going to decrease your ability to attract capital because you really don't have a sustainable product, or people will be concerned that you don't have a sustainable product, or people are concerned that you don't really understand your audience, your indication, your end user, and your growth trajectory starts to be either slow or uneven. And that's because it's not, again, that you haven't developed a great product, you just haven't done the research. And when we're talking about medicine, it is so overwhelmingly complicated, certainly for the patient to even navigate a system.
What I've found too, even in my own experience, it's the workflow is super important, but also the data capture. So all three of you are leading programs or solutions, and you have to know what those solutions are doing, and you have to have the data to do that. And these technologies can be amazing vessels for capturing those data, but you have to know what data to capture and how to capture it. And you can't just capture everything, because then that gets very overwhelming for everybody. So it's really the nuance and the expertise that you all bring to that that's super important. I'd love to know, and we'll start with Jeff on this one. But what do you know now that you wish you knew before you made the move? And I think for a lot of people in the audience who are either curious or contemplating, I think this part of the conversation might be really helpful. So Jeff, we'll start with you.
Um, it's not going to be revolutionary because Jayne basically just said it. I think, when I worked in biopharma and I worked in some other aspects of healthcare, having a product that worked and did what it said it was going to do was pretty much what you needed. There were other aspects, don't get me wrong, but failure was much less frequent. Like if you have a drug that works, it'll probably get used and it'll probably get paid for. Not all the time, but that's a little bit more common. I think to Jayne's point, when I first was evaluating my first products and my first jobs in digital, I was like, oh, well, the product works. Well, that's just the price of entry to get into this game. To Jayne's point, it was everything else that comes after it that really determines, I think, the difference between success and failure. And having a product that works, like or an algorithm, there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of those. Finding one that you can fit into the system, into the care flow that physicians want to use, or PTs or nurses want to interact with, and patients will be compliant with, that's a whole nother story. So it really was the rest of the journey that I didn't realize you needed to focus on as much. That was a real eye opener for me.
And Jayne, how about you? What do you, and you've made this move relatively recently, so you might still be kind of in that discovery process, but what are some of the learnings that you've had?
And so, my learnings are sort of lifelong learnings on my journey. And this is maybe something very specific to women and minority groups. And, if I were to go back, I wished I had found my voice sooner. I wish I had spoken up. Oftentimes I knew the answers. Oftentimes I knew all of the answers, but I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to appear threatening to the power structure, or I wanted to appear to be a team player. All of these things that go through your mind when you're a woman and when you are in a minority group and you're trying to fit in. And now on this side of my career, I realized not only did I do a disservice to myself and my career, I did a disservice to patients. I did a disservice to the end user by not speaking up and finding my voice and feeling like I should be silenced by the system such that I could navigate it. And so I would say, if you have the answer, speak up. If you think you have the answer, speak up. If you don't have the answer, but you have something you want to say, say it. Because the point is to save lives on the other end. And sometimes I think about all the things that I didn't say. Could that have been a better product for someone while I'm second guessing what I'm doing? And so that would be something as I mentor women and mentor girls and mentor others to try to find your voice. And if you can't advocate for yourself, think about how it may or may not impact a patient. That's ultimately what we want to do is save lives and improve the quality of life. And that means you have 5 minutes of being uncomfortable, or maybe what you said was completely wrong and you are embarrassed for those 5 minutes. That's still a learning curve. And remember, the point is to improve someone's life, to save someone's life. And you never know how one bit of input that you held back and didn't speak up could have made the difference in something in that chain of processes. So that would be the advice that I give. I learned that late in life. Nobody taught me that. I finally just found my footing and said, I've got to say something. I don't want to be silent anymore because I think that this is harming patients.
Great. And Brooke, what is your advice?
Yeah, I definitely relate to what Jayne said. I also learned that lesson. It's important as clinicians, we have that extra responsibility to speak up if something, won't work for a certain population. And if there's not that product market fit for a certain group of patients, it's our responsibility to speak up and make that known. It'll definitely be uncomfortable, but it's super important. And I think another thing that Jayne touched on was I wish that I reached out to people that already work in this community earlier, because I found a lot of people that were willing to either serve as a mentor for me, or even just have a conversation and give me some insight into what they do and how they got there. So I would definitely encourage other people who are interested in transitioning to the tech world to reach out to people in the community. And most people, you know, they want to help and get you to where you want to be.
Great. So to the audience, we're going to open up for questions. There's a Q&A function, so feel free to put those questions in, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. While those questions are getting queued up, I'd like to ask a little bit about your training needs. So my observation is, especially through the pandemic, where a lot of healthcare professionals had to transition, even in their regular roles as a healthcare professional, to using digital tools. Sometimes there was, they still had the clinical skills, but they lacked the skill sets in actually using the technologies. So I think for a lot of people, and that I think that may still be the case, really trying to back, into, what are the best practices? What is the skill set? But I'd love to hear from you as you made that transition. We'll start with Jayne on this. What additional skills did you obtain, or frankly wish that you had as you were making that move?
You make a good point, and it's not just utilizing the technology that suddenly was thrust upon us in COVID, right? To keep people safe. We went to Zoom at a crazy speed, but different people have different levels of comfort, not with executing the technology, but with being communicators and communicating effectively. And so I think that was a big learning curve. Some people were better at it than others, but the doctors as well. Remember, doctors are human beings. Everybody's a human being. People felt uncomfortable. People felt stilted. Am I making my point? Do I look the way that I should be looking right now on this? Does the patient feel confident in me? Is my screen crooked? All those kinds of things we really had to manage, because these are not skills that doctors were taught. We suddenly were on Zoom. COVID started, we suddenly were on Zoom, and just like everybody else, looking off in the wrong direction. So the patient is looking at you, you're looking off to the right, you're looking off to the left. So all of that was part of a learning curve where no one was taught it. So some people learned more quickly, other people's learned slowly. Some people have never really gotten the hang of it. But there was no formalization of how we go to telehealth. Not at all. No training. And so you see a different level of effectiveness all over the board.
Yep. And Jeff, how about you? What is your advice on the training needs and skills? Oops, I think you're on mute, Jeff.
I think there can be this overwhelming, somebody had to do it on the call, Pat.
Yep.
I'm just glad it was me. I think there's this overwhelming, almost analysis paralysis sometimes that can happen, where you're overwhelmed with the amount of data that is available to you now when you start utilizing these technologies. There's a potential for a ton more patient information coming in every single day, and in giving you extra detail than maybe as a practitioner, depending on what your specialty is, that you do or do not need. So I think understanding the best way to handle that, and I think, going back to Jayne, I'd rather have user-centered product design so that doesn't happen. But figuring out, I think, in a discerning way to be what is actually going to enhance my clinical practice versus what's actually just kind of noise that maybe we don't need, because not all tech is going to be good tech. You do have to be discerning in how you evaluate it. And I don't know that I wouldn't have been taught, and I mean, nobody probably is, how to actually evaluate what tech is going to benefit your practice versus what may just complicate things for people.
Excellent. And Brooke?
Yeah, so I definitely think one thing that is important is really figuring out, as a clinician, do you want to work on the clinical side as more of a consultant role, or do you want to be in the operations side? Because that'll really define what type of skill set the company is looking for. In terms of being a consultant, obviously physicians and any other clinicians will know the evidence-based recommendations to adhere to compliance and regulations for a certain product. But if you do want to be on the more operation side, getting involved in product, I would definitely recommend using free resources that are out there. Watch YouTube videos, check out like Coursera, and really get into how to learn the language for AI and machine learning, and really just build your competency. And there's so many resources out there, so it's limitless.
Excellent. Yeah, one thing that I notice, and so Hello Heart, for example, is part of our Innovators Network. I'm very familiar with, the technology and the solution. And again, for many healthcare professionals, you're trained in really face-to-face, one-on-one encounters. And that's maybe a skill set to build, is really learning how to take a more of a population health approach. Yes, you have a group of patients, but in some of these technology solutions, the opportunities, you can reach more people, and you can reach people, in different ways. So, the population health approach, but also doing it from an asynchronous point of view as well. So it's not always face-to-face, one at a time. Sometimes it might be through a remote patient monitoring or some other solution where data points might be coming in from many people, and that may be part of the skill set, is how do I filter and manage all of these data points coming at me, whereas in the past I might have been doing these all one at a time. Any thoughts from the group on that?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's a great point. And Hello Heart is a completely virtual company. So imagine that is a big difference than being in the hospital and being patient facing. Everybody sits all over the entire world. There is no headquarters. And so we've got to use all kinds of technology just to communicate, but not only with each other, with our clients as well, and also communicate the effectiveness of the Hello Heart cardiovascular system, which is there to manage blood pressure remotely, to bend the arc on heart disease, because heart disease is 80 to 85% preventable. And hypertension is one of the things that drives that. So when you're talking about now a virtual company, the entire company is representing biotech and technology just in the way that it is set up. And you've got to be able to master all of the different software platforms that we use for communication just to be effective in your job before you even go out to clients and begin to talk about your cardiovascular program like Hello Heart. And so that's also a different skill level, but most of us are acquiring these skills very, very, very quickly. And for physicians, as I said, in interfacing with patients, there were many when we started telehealth, because it literally started overnight, completely unprepared, not as effective on Zoom or on a Google Meet or whatever as they could have been in person, uncomfortable with the technology, and have learned to get comfortable with it, or at least more comfortable with it. And that's where we are really, with technology. Technology is another area where you've got to be courageous enough to step forward and embrace it. And, as you said, fail fast or move it forward, but not shy away from it, because then you're sort of left behind. And even the failures are successes. Those failures teach you what you
They're
don't
learning
like, what you do
opportunities.
like, what works next time, what doesn't work next time. So don't be afraid of those failures. Those failures are catapulting you to success. You're just learning that much faster. That's the artificial intelligence of the human learning.
And I think to Jayne's point, if you're also looking at I think checking your biases at the door, especially when you're developing this technology and being more inclusive. When I started, there was definitely a bias that, well, based on your age is going to be your technology profile. And to Jayne's point, we're all still learning, and we're all still able to adopt new technologies. And when you look at the cardiovascular space and how it, compared to other specialties, has really gravitated, I think, towards the use of technology. And a lot of those conditions, if you look at the epidemiology, these are patients that are probably more towards the back half of their life, and yet they're still able to adopt this tech and move forward. So we still get clients that come to us and go, well, we want to look at older and younger patients because we want to get the older patients because they're not tech savvy, they're not going to adopt new tech. Get rid of that thought process. Patients are people and they want to get better. And to Jayne's point, we can all find a way to be motivated to learn new tech and learn new things. And that really applies in this space to patients as well.
Really good point.
Yeah, I think one thing we learned from the pandemic is that people will use the technology. We used to hear before the pandemic, it was, oh, my patients would never use this technology, or only the young, tech savvy, healthy people, but certainly not somebody that's older. I mean, my goodness, my mother, my 87-year-old mother, I can't keep her off of Facebook. She's snapping pictures, she's buying things on Amazon, so she uses tech. So it's not a matter of they won't. And frankly, what we learned is in many times the patients and the consumers were a little bit ahead of the healthcare professionals. I think for many healthcare professionals, they kind of need to kind of catch up to where their patients are from a technology perspective. You mentioned AI. We used to use, you think of terms like AI and virtual reality, augmented reality, blockchain, as the dark arts of technology. There was the traditional, like a telemedicine visit and maybe a blood pressure reading, but now we're getting into much more advanced, kind of at the intersection of cool and a little creepy, but it is a way to, it's where these things are headed. But I'd love to get your thoughts. Maybe we'll start with Jayne. Where do you think this technology revolution is headed? And what are your thoughts and ideas there?
Yeah, it's open-ended. And I was going to add that, I think physicians can be reticent to adopt technology in our professional lives because we have a concern with whether or not it has been validated to a high enough degree. Personally, we may be using it at home, but then when it comes time to apply it to the patient, eh, we feel a little uncomfortable with that. I'm not sure if this is really something I want to recommend and be on record as recommending based on this
Mhm.
technology, even though I use it at home and I use it for myself. But when we have a higher level of responsibility to other people. And so that makes us a little bit more wary of what technology we should and shouldn't be using, what's actually giving us good information, what is guiding us to perhaps make poorer recommendations based on data. And so, that is actually a stopgap because we don't necessarily have the capabilities of filtering, well, what's good technology and what's bad technology. So we have a high index of suspicion of using technology-based solutions for our patients when we are driving patient care, even though we may personally be using it at home.
It really speaks to the need for better research in this area. And to Jeff's earlier point, the threshold is not does the technology work. It really should be does it produce the health outcome that it's intended to produce. And some of the technologies are still at the yes it works stage, not at the it's actually moving the needle on a health outcome. So Jeff, how about you? Where do you think things are headed?
A little bit of wishful thinking in here, and I'm going to admit that to start. I think there's two things that could happen, or that I hope will happen at least. Well, the first one, definitely hope. We may actually get to a point where we're able to do preventative care at a more population health level in a holistic sense, where there's more data being collected that is useful, that can predict health outcomes, that we're trying to turn into digital measures and assessments. And I do hope that someday we're able to get to a point where we can actually figure out that somebody's at risk for something, not just because of their demographic or because of just what they tell us subjectively, but objectively, we know that that's happening. So I'm hoping preventative care, and it's not on the clinicians. This is more, can we get the whole healthcare system going that way? Health insurers, patients. Can we actually use technology to do that? I think the other thing is there's the acute care hospital at home program that Medicare started and some commercial health insurers. I really think healthcare at home and decentralized healthcare from the healthcare system in terms of brick and mortar is just going to keep expanding. And it gets to a point where not only is the healthcare happening at home, your healthcare system becomes your home as well. And I think that when you look at like the capabilities of remote monitoring technologies, you look at certain indications like heart failure, where the acute care hospital at home program has been, I think, successful, at least in pilot phase. I can see more of that happening as time goes on.
Great. And Brooke, where do you think things are headed?
Yeah, so to echo what you both said, I definitely agree we need a responsible and sustainable implementation of technology, and anything that's kind of bulk that's not really adding value to patient care, I think that'll kind of be filtered out. But what Jeff was saying about congestive heart failure specifically, so that's a population that I work with to implement remote patient monitoring after discharge to prevent readmission. One barrier that I hope will change in the next couple of years is payers recognizing the value of that, because unfortunately that's still a barrier to patients being able to have that technology at home. So hopefully that's something that will improve in the next, 5 years or so.
Excellent. And Brooke, we'll start with you. This will be the final question. What is your recommendation for someone in your field that's considering making a move from really more of a traditional clinical setting into more of a technology-based setting?
Yeah, I would say really look for a mentor, a coach, and a sponsor. So have people in your corner that are going to be there if you have a question about something. Have somebody that can pave the way for you and really help you figure out how you can get to where you want to be. I think that's something that was really pivotal for me, was reaching out to other nurses that are in healthcare tech, and they really helped me to not only become more literate in technology terms, but also just to develop confidence. And that was something that Jayne talked about earlier as well. It just, find somebody who can help you to realize the value you bring to the table, because you already have those skills. It's just a matter of selling yourself and putting it into business terms. So that would be my advice.
Great. And Jeff, what is your recommendation?
Yeah, I agree with everything Brooke said. We need you now. This isn't something where you have to wait and learn for 3 years and there's some skill set that you need to develop. There are things you can definitely learn that will make it easier, but I think clinicians as a whole group, some of them that are transitioning, underestimate how their current skill set and knowledge of the healthcare system is already incredibly valuable to these companies.
Great. And Jayne?
I would say get comfortable living in this gray zone. Get comfortable identifying yourself as a trailblazer. And once you give yourself that terminology, then you start to feel more comfortable in the gray zone. You recognize, oh, this is what it's supposed to look like. Very foggy. I'm not able to see what is the next step. Things can be moving around you. The other thing that I would say is to learn to advocate for yourself. And remember, and I've learned this late, I'm glad Brooke is learning it early. Remember, in advocating for yourself, you actually are advocating for the patient. And so if you need to turn that thought around in your head to say, if I don't speak up, someone else may not. And this device could be better. This technology could be better. And let's have the input now, as opposed to the examples that I gave when it's out in real world and when they begin to understand what those deficiencies are. It's hard to advocate for yourself. I'm telling you personally, I have struggled with it, but I have learned, and it's easier for me to advocate for other people. And so now I advocate for myself because I recognize that this means this may be a better outcome for the patient. And that's why I'm here, to save lives, to improve someone's quality of life, to improve healthcare. And if I have something to contribute, then say it. Even if it's worth the embarrassment, it's worth the feeling of isolation or being on the spot or being in the spotlight, or maybe somebody won't like you. Remember, all those things are temporary. That's part of that gray zone. We're trying to figure it out.
That's great advice. I really appreciate all three of you being so candid. I know the audience, whether it's live or in future, watching this on YouTube, will find your advice incredibly valuable. So I want to thank all three of you for your participation, and I want to wish all of you a very happy and healthy Heart Month and beyond. So, and again, just a reminder, on Friday, be sure to wear your red. Support the cause. Thank you all very much and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.